Hi, I'm Lindsey Porter, and this is my testimony. So, I grew up in a Christian home. My parents were first generation believers, and I'm super thankful for that because they showed us how to live a life that was about the Lord. We went to church every Sunday and to the Wednesday night activities. My upbringing was, pretty similar to other people's. I had a pretty just mellow childhood, and then around age 10, I experienced something that was pretty traumatic that totally rocked my world and changed how I felt about myself and about people around me. I started experiencing some things I didn't quite fully understand in my heart, and I was starting to struggle with depression at age 10. I was a people pleaser by this point. I didn't quite understand what was going on. I didn't understand why I was second guessing myself all the time and why I was having these just feeling so crappy about myself. But it was due to the fact of what had just happened to me. And I didn't quite know how to process all of that. And come to high school, I really just dove into my schoolwork, and I was all about getting good grades, and I loved school, but it was something that I could control, and I could just throw myself into there and not have to think about what had happened. Things started changing after I graduated. About 19, 20 years old, I found out that my grandpa had cancer. And I remember I found out right around Thanksgiving, and he died 3 months later. And it shook me. I ended up dropping out of college. I didn't know how to process that. I didn't know how to deal with it. And I started turning to drinking. And it totally was starting to weasel its way inside, and I didn't know what else to do. My depression was still getting worse, and I went and got a job at this place that was so full of just an evil spirit there. That's the only way I can describe this place. And it took me way further down in my depression. I got involved in some friends that were so full of the world, and it just took me to a very unhealthy place. I got in a really unhealthy relationship, and it took me at a place where I became suicidal, and my depression at that point was at an ultimate low, and I didn't know how, again, to process all of that, and I was miserable. Still hadn't told anybody about what had happened to me, and I was turning more to drinking. I was turning more into this relationship that was super unhealthy, and the suicide thoughts came, and I remember I was supposed to go away for the weekend on this women's retreat. And that same weekend, I was planning on admitting myself into a hospital for some help. My parents did not want me to do that, and they intervened. I was supposed to go and be at this women's retreat with my mom and my sisters-in-law, and I just fought it. I ended up going with my dad up to go visit my brother and crash their men's weekend, but they didn't want to leave me home because they were afraid for my life. Seeing it now, I know God was using them to protect me by having them keep me from staying home and going to the hospital. And I'm super, super thankful for that, because I don't know where I'd be if I'd even be here if it wasn't for that. That same year, I totally just lost my train of thought, Billy.
It's okay.
That same year, my other grandpa died of a very random heart attack. That took me again to a place that I did not know how to process. I still hadn't learned how to deal with that pain. That one was really hard because we didn't expect it. And 9 weeks later, his wife, my grandma, she died. And so then a year and a half, I lost 3 of the most important people in my life. And again, that took me to a horrible place of depression and on top of my already depression. And I just dove into drinking and in the party scene. I was at the point where I just didn't care. I wanted to numb that pain. I wanted to numb the pain of the past. And that's what I did. I got involved in relationships that weren't good. And I felt so just disgusted with myself. Just not like I didn't have any worth. And I remember I was with this guy, and looking at it now, there was God's protection in that relationship because he was a hardcore drug addict, super into drugs. And I remember being at a party, and there'd be these people that would offer me to do things, and he would always step in and be like, don't do that. He's like, Lindsey, don't say yes, don't ever start it. And I'm so thankful for that now, because knowing how I was starting to get addicted to drinking, to numbing that pain, and using that as my crutch, I didn't know how I'd respond to the drugs. And I remember one time when my drinking, it was starting to get out of control with wanting to go to the bar every night and drinking at home before we'd go. He told me that I got to get some stuff together because I have a drinking problem, and he's starting to see it. And, I was pretty upset because, who was he to tell me that I had a problem when he was all in his drugs, but looking back, again, that was God's protection over me, and showing me just where I needed to change. I worked at a school, and around like a few weeks later after that happened, it was spring break for the school. So I went down to visit my parents down in Arkansas, where they were living at the time. And it came at a great time in my life, at a time that I felt so helpless, and that, I just felt so horrible about myself. Just felt worthless, And I remember there was this gal that was at the church where my parents were, and she made me feel so loved and accepted. And I don't think I'm ever going to be able to forget her, because she had a huge impact on my life at that point. And, she'd ask me questions, and I share with her, stuff that was going on in my life that I just really couldn't tell my parents, or that I didn't want to. And so after that week, I was heading back home, and I hit, it was the last snowstorm of the winter season. And I happened to hit, it was in Butler, Missouri, and I hit a patch of black ice. I remember my car spinning around. I'll tell you the song. It was by Johnny Cash, Ring of Fire. And I just remember hitting the bridge, the wall. I can't even think of what they're called. Yeah, but my car, how it landed or how it ended up, the rear of it was against the bridge, and it wasn't like the concrete one. It was metal, and with like the little wooden pegs, and so the rear of my car was there, and the front of it was in the road, and it was where it landed. It was right over the hill. So when a car would come up, they couldn't see it. They weren't able to see my car until they came over the hill. And by that time, it was almost too late to move. But fortunately, people were pretty quick to do it. And I remember this one guy stopped and pulled over. It was him and his grandson. And I can't help but think now they were my guardian angels at that time, that they were there to look out for me until the paramedics and the sheriff came. I felt, as soon as I saw him, I felt such a peace, and it really put me at ease with what just had happened. And I remember, excuse me, I remember when the paramedics came, they didn't understand why I didn't have a scratch on me and that I was walking away with just bruises. And the sheriff couldn't believe, he's like, I don't understand how your car did not go over that bridge. It should have been over that bridge. And I remember as he kept saying that, I'm thinking, I know why. That whole trip home, all I kept thinking about was how something has to be different in my life. And I knew God was trying to do something there. And I knew at that point, like, God was using that to show me how much I do need him and that he's not finished with me yet. And my parents came and got me, and they took me back home to where I was living at the time. And that following Sunday, I went to church with my brother and my sister-in-law, and I gave my heart back to the Lord. And that following Tuesday, I went to Celebrate Recovery to help me with, the stopping of drinking and what that looked like. And that's when I met Mark. It was his first night as well as my first night there. He had just gotten out of prison. And so that was the start of our beginning. And at that point, I did not really want anything to do with men. But he kept pursuing, and I eventually just gave in. But he did something big by putting Mark in my life. He was a safe place that I didn't know that I really needed. And we got married. I was still dealing with my depression at this time, still dealing with insecurities and not being able to completely trust. I was really hurt by what I had gone through as a child, and the people that I was supposed to trust the most, or the person I was supposed to trust the most in my life, let me down. And it was really hard to deal with that and to not put Mark into that same category. He's never given me reason to not trust him, but it was from what had happened. And that was something that really was hard in our relationship. It was a struggle that we had to work through. At this point, we were married, and we felt God's call to come to Ocean Beach. And, I was nervous, but I was excited. It's like, oh, maybe I think it deep in my heart, I was hoping that some of my depression would be left back in Iowa, that I wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. But as we all know, it just follows us. So coming out, still, I dealt with insecurity, my depression, my not being able to completely trust, and my self-worth. And it was really hard because I missed my family. I missed everything that was comfortable, plus dealing with this on top of it all. It was not easy on our relationship, but we kept pressing forward. And I remember we finally were at a point where I was like, I need to get some help, because I can't grow, and I can't be the person that God's trying to make me to be when I am so focused on this depression and having, to deal with these thoughts that would come up of when I was younger. So I remember last year, so January of 2018, Mark had challenged us on a Sunday in a sermon about a word, and what that word was going to be to live out that year. And I remember as I was praying about it, I just kept getting the word freedom. And, I didn't quite understand what that was all going to look like. But I knew that was the word. And God brought the verse, 2 Corinthians 3:17. The Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And I remember clinging to that verse all last year. I mean, it was definitely a roller coaster, but that's what I clung to. And as I've been going through counseling, it was until about a month or so ago that I finally was able to release and have that freedom and that peace just overtake me from what I had gone through as a child. And it was the most incredible feeling. I remember praying and with the counselor, and he just had these prayers over me. And I remember how much I could feel that burden being lifted. And God totally did something that day in my heart and in my mind. The stuff that I was dealing with before, I haven't had that in my head anymore. And it's amazing to know that I don't have to go back to that place. And one of the things that really struck me when we were doing this, and he asked me if I was willing to let the Lord come in and hug that little girl that had gone through that. And I remember it took me a minute to say yes, but as soon as I did, that's when I felt that burden be gone, and where I felt freedom for the first time in my life from that incident. And I'm so thankful that I finally let the Lord just come in and hug that little girl that needed that hug so bad. He's really been doing something in my heart and in my life, and I'm still a work in progress, but I know there's only one way to go, and that's forward. And I'm so thankful for what he's been doing. And I know that whenever those thoughts come, I know how to rebuke them. I know how to shut that down quick. And I'm so thankful again for what God's done in my life. I am Lindsey Porter, and I am Regeneration Church.